when people saw images of children with bullet holes in their head in school uniforms, a rage that took place there. And hence you saw a mobocracy of a particular kind. Stability is very important for the people in Nepal, very important for India too. The same three people have been prime ministers over the last 10 years. When you've been in power for so long, whether you like it or not, your understanding of the people's aspirations and your willingness to do anything to meet those aspirations becomes a bit of a distant thing. As you go higher up the ladder and you've been there longer, your skin becomes that much thinner. One of the lessons, not only for India, but for everywhere in the world, is that avenues of dissent should always be available for people and the populations. And these need to be taken into account. You and I, if we say we are Vishwa Gurus, in the end, people ask you, so what about in your neighborhood? And the country by which they will judge you is Nepal. People at the grassroots are feeling empowered. If nothing else, they are finding ways of venting their anger. You saw this in Nepal and Sri Lanka. For us in India, democratic roots are deep. And that's something which is our greatest asset. That's what we are proud of, isn't it, in the world?
Nepal is burning. What began as protests by the nation's youth, triggered by a social media ban, has spiraled into nationwide unrest. At least 22 people have been killed. Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has resigned, and the military have been deployed onto the streets. To discuss Nepal's fragile situation and what it means for India, we're joined today by former diplomat Manjeev Singh Puri, who served as India's ambassador to Nepal from 2017 to 2020. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Puri. Welcome to the
Thank you, Danishka. Thank you very much.
To start with, what are the key factors that led to such a large-scale uprising in Nepal?
Tanishka, we need to understand a lot of changes which have happened in Nepal over the last 20, 25, 30 years. We all know that monarchy is no longer there. That's the simplistic. But the changes have been societal. And the basic thing has been Nepal, in a sense, imbibing globalization. During the times of the monarchy, and in fact, right till the 1990s, passports were a rarity for Nepalese. So other than coming to India, Nepalese were going nowhere in the world. Today, 20% of Nepal's citizenry is in the world, across the world, not just in India and the Gulf, but they are in the Americas, they're in Europe, they're in Southeast Asia, in Australia. And so therefore, globalization, awareness of the world, understanding the Western ideas has become, in a sense, internal. It has also meant a great deal of money coming to the Nepalese economy through remittances, etc. Then, Tanishka, there was something else. You had this Maoist insurgency for about 10 odd years. Its aftermath was anchored in the UN, in Western NGOs, even the church organizations coming and, proliferating in Nepal in a very large manner. Now, what did they do? All of this brought Nepal, let me say, very quickly forward and in a sense imbibing ideas which are in the world, ideas which are, you can say, Western liberal kind of ideas which became there. And so therefore, in some senses, a bit of a difference, and we need to understand it. They are Hindus, they eat the same food as us, they wear the same clothes as us, they look like us. But this particular thing has brought about a major change in Nepalese society. And now, therefore, when I come to what has happened, aspirations of people rise. As you see the world doing well, Nepal is a landlocked country. Abilities to be able to meet these kind of rising aspirations, especially for young people, are limited. The only avenues is migration. If you migrate, well, if you stay back, what do? You went. That's one of the things. And that happens even in our country. It happens in the United States, everywhere. For ordinary people, venting is important. And therefore, this social media, these apps, etc., are important for you to share them. Now, in Nepal, you had the advent of Republican democracy from 2015 on 28 onwards. You had all of that there. But let's understand what happened in the last election in 2022. You had a hung house, and there are three big parties. The Nepali Congress, Mr. Sher Bahadur Dioba, the Communist Party, Mr. KP Sharma Oli, and the Maoists, Mr. Prachand. They would invariably form a coalition, two of them together, and effectively keep the others out. But somewhere a year and a half back, the two largest parties came together. They not just shut Mr. Prachand out, but effectively shut all institutional mechanisms of dissent coming out in. So now, in a country where activism was very much internalized, given the changeovers in Nepal, the fact that at the political level there was a kind of logjam which was taking place. So when some things like this happen, what do people do? The only answer is, and they took the cue certainly from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc., etc., come out on the streets. And that's exactly what we saw happening. The thin edge of the wedge was the social media ban. But I want to take 30 seconds more of your time. Nepal has seen public protests on several subjects many times in the past. Was the government unprepared? Did various miscreants and others, for a variety of reasons, over activists indulge in violence that should not have happened? My answer to all of them is true. But the fact is that what happened on the ground was, whether they were unprepared or not, the Nepal police acted in a ham-handed manner. They killed, as you said, 22 people. This is something that Nepalese in Kathmandu have never seen. Indeed, they haven't seen it in the Pahar. You have individual incidents of police brutality, but you haven't seen the police opening fire on people. This is something that did happen in the southern parts of Nepal, but not in the Madhya. And so, therefore, when people saw images of children with bullet holes in their head in school uniforms, a rage that took place there. And hence, you saw mobocracy of a particular kind, violence against public institutions, violence targeting politicians who are generally considered by everybody to be vile and corrupt at no end at all. And so many of these things happened. But from today, we see the army has come back. Have they used the Sri Lankan playbook? Let people vent for a day, let something happen. Have they come back, taken control? I hope they have, because I am not a supporter of venting. I am completely against any kind of violence. I abhor it. I think it's a black spot on Nepalese democracy. And even if this protest was democratic, it certainly went out of control. But I'm glad and I'm happy. I hope that they are taking things back. Issues of reaching out or targeting businesses, each and every one of them need to support. Stop. That's important. So this is to give you an idea of what happened. The thin edge of the wedge was that, but it's a systemic thing resulting from aspirations not met and a completely unresponsive government.
But at what point did the protests get violent, even if it's from the side of the police? How did it reach that level?
So, as I mentioned to you, protests in Nepal are not uncommon. Uh, was the government unprepared on the size of the protest? Maybe. The protesters reached the Parliament House where they indulged in, let me say, violence, but violence of a certain kind. The police, perhaps being outnumbered, overreacted. The fact is that they resulted in the killing of 18, 19 people. Hundreds of people got injured. The hospitals got surrounded with all of this. And so, therefore, uh, what could have been controlled simply spun out of control. And on the other hand, of course, there were underlying factors of huge elements of an unresponsive government. And then people started saying, you've killed my children. This needs retribution of a particular kind. The fact that you're bad, you're vile, you're corrupt is anyway the case. And so, therefore, this happened and it unrolled for 24 hours. Shouldn't have happened. Uh, but has it allowed a venting of frustration and anger? And we hope to go back a la Sri Lanka. Let's hope so.
You mentioned the aspiration and the frustration in the youth. So, were the political elite really unaware of how much this had built up over the years?
So, Tanishka, the same three people have been prime ministers over the last 10 years. When you've been in power for so long, whether you like it or not, your understanding of the people's aspirations and your willingness to do anything to meet those aspirations becomes a bit of a distant thing. Rent seeking, corruption, many of those things happen. And you start seeing criticism as being something which is extremely bad. In fact, Mr. Oli said, this disparaging which is taking place on the social media, they were disparaging him and his government. This is disparaging Nepal. This is a common thing. We see it in all developing countries. As you go higher up the ladder and you've been there longer, your skin becomes that much thinner. And there's no doubt about that at all. Were they therefore distant from the pulse of the people? The fact is, they were perhaps less interested in the pulse of the people. Pulse was important once every 5 years when you had elections. People had no choice but to choose your. Having said all this, something else happened. In the last election, out of 275 members in the House of People in Nepal, 20 came from a new party of young people. Then Kathmandu had mayoral elections. A young man, Mr. Balen Shah, who is not aligned to any of these big political parties, got elected mayor and is hugely popular. What did the established political parties did? Not only did they come together in parliament to stifle any kind of dissent, they realized that these people were a threat to them. The leader of that party, which won 20 seats, was jailed and was freed by the crowds yesterday. Uh, any amount of efforts have been made to put roadblocks in the way of Balan Shah and his popularity. And so, therefore, there was a kind of pent up thing that it was instigated by people who are, let me say, very strong activists, very energetic activists, and if I may even so say, activists who were misled or were perhaps let me say, activists who were who actually had some other kind of ideas in their head, not necessarily all very positive. These things do happen, but it is then for the government and the officials on the ground to act with maturity, with sagacity, and to be able to control this, because miscreant behavior is not something that you should not be prepared for.
I want to draw in your experience of serving in Nepal and other countries to understand if, in your view, this unrest reflects a failure of democracy, or does it in a way reflect democratical expression?
So I would like to believe the latter. Uh, Democracy means many things. I think fundamentally we need to understand that democracy, if we say it's a valve for ascertaining public's needs, their aspirations, and doing what they want, it's also parliament, and democracy is also a way of allowing people to vent their dissent. And therefore, in democracies, opposition is very important. Now, we all have grown up on two kinds of major things which are known to all of us, the English speaking world. You see the British House of Commons, it's so very common for questions against the Prime Minister, whether they listen or not, at least in public, there's a certain degree of listen. And in time, things do tend to happen. In the United States, at the moment, things are very problematic. Uh, uh, what is happening in the United States at the moment is a straightforward business that, there's a trifecta, everybody is on one side, and so on and so forth. But still, don't they have a situation where everybody has to come together? They try and see if we can work out some kind of compromise. Can we take things forward? In Nepal, with the Nepali Congress and the communists having come together, they had two-thirds majority in parliament. And in a sense, that reserve valve for parliamentary dissent also came to an end, leaving people with little option but to be on the streets.
In the last few years, like you mentioned, Mr. Puri, we've seen similar uprising in India's neighbors in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, even some parts of Pakistan. Do you see these as isolated events, or is there indeed a wider crisis that is affecting South Asian governance models?
Well, I won't say South Asian, but I would say that, with the much better connectivity, I don't want to use the word globalization because it's related to trade and commerce and so on, but much better connectivity. People at the grassroots are feeling empowered. If nothing else, they're finding ways of venting their anger. You saw this in Nepal and Sri Lanka, perhaps some kind of parallels. No two countries are exact parallels, but Sri Lanka had the same thing. COVID crisis resulted in tremendous economic drawdowns. The Rajapakse government in huge corruptions. Nepal, similarly, political corruption, people being quite empowered as a result of social media and in terms of better connectivity, etc. You see these particular parallels. There's no doubt about that at all. Of course, it gives opportunities for miscreants, etc., to take advantage of the situation. Pakistan, too, people protest. The systems of the state, particularly the army, etc., are very strong and are able to do something. In Bangladesh, they again took the same line that, let the protest happen. We can't defend this anymore. That's something that I think all political systems worldwide need to understand, that not just parliamentary systems, elections once every 5 years. It's not just that. You need to be aware of what the people want, and you need to keep your finger on their pulse. You need to be very, very mindful of this particular thing. Empathetic to the people is also important. But on the other hand, these countries, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc., let's also understand institutionally, they're not that strong, or the state power abilities are not that much and could not have mattered. And so, therefore, greater onus on the part of the political leadership to have been sagacious and so on. But hopefully, things will come under control. Already, there are calls to calm things down. Even the leaders of the Gen Z have said so. The army is out on the streets. This looting, etc., of shops and businesses, including Indian businesses, should come down. And hopefully, the political vacuum is also filled by bringing in some leaders from Gen Z, some untainted politicians, some other leaders, the former Chief Justice, maybe, etc., and former interim government. Stability is very important for the people in Nepal, very important for India too.
The question on a lot of people's minds, especially in India, has been how India, despite being so culturally and geographically close to these countries, how has it so far avoided such mass unrest?
So, Tanishka, we are a very large country and a very large society and a very strong state apparatus. We vote and we have internalized voting. Don't forget, after the Second World War and the first phase of decolonization, there were only two countries in the world which retained multi party democracy, which took to it from the beginning and retained it right throughout, India, and in our wake, Sri Lanka. There's nowhere else. Everywhere else in the world, you had some kind of army rule, monarchy, some kind of one party coming to the power. We have internalized democracy. We feel that this every 5 years is enough. We still have street protests, we have all of that, but we have elections around the time, all the time in different states. People have this opportunity of, let me say, venting what they are saying, and that's important.
But what are the lessons that you think India should take from such uprisings in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and our other neighbors?
Look, in my personal view, India is a very different kind of society. Our sheer size of our economy, uh, the traditions that we have of democracy makes us completely different. But of course, one of the lessons, not only for India, but for everywhere in the world, is that avenues of dissent should always be available for people and the populations, and they need to be taken into account. Politicians need to have a degree of empathy for the government. And those things are particularly important for all societies, especially because communications have improved and you can try your level best, but everyone knows what's happening in their, not only in their neighborhood, but what's happening in the world. And their aspirations and understanding starts getting informed by all of that. That's important for everyone. For us in India, as I mentioned to you, democratic roots are deep. And that's something which is our greatest asset. That's what we are proud of, isn't it, in the world?
Right. But like you said, I mean, for leaders who have been in power for a particular number of years, after a point, it does sometimes a reality check, whether if it's in the form of protests or elections, like you mentioned, it is important to keep them in check to be connected with the pulse of the people.
Absolutely. Look, elections are perhaps the best, and that happens in a country like India on a constant basis. In Nepal, as I told you, for the last nearly 10, 15 years, three people have monopolized the position of the prime minister. And it was like a kind of merry-go-round between the two of them. Between the three of them, any two would combine together. Last 2 years back, two of the largest decided to come together. And what happened as a result of this was that even this business that you could play around on the musical chairs came to an end. And so, therefore, what are people left with in terms of dissent? And an opportunity came their way by what they believe is a brazenly authoritarian act of banning social media and calling it freedom of expression, etc. All that is true, not at all untrue. All that is true. But because you've become distant from the people, because you're so sanguine in your power, you have the entire parliament is in your control, nothing is happening, state institutions are with you, you tend to tell people, no, you're wrong, listen to us. And that didn't what happened.
India has been criticized by watchers over the last few years of muzzling dissent. Do you think this will serve as a wake up call to those in power?
I believe you and every one of us, none of us can have anything against dissent. But India as muzzling dissent, I understand where you are coming from. But let me say, the parliament, doesn't it function? The opposition makes its points. Of course, the numbers are such that the government is doing well. But then that's because you and I have voted them into power. At the end of the day, it's for us and the people. You have elections coming up. Please, if you have dissent, act in that way. If you don't, then the party that you voted and their manifesto, that's what you agreed to. So, in that sense, democracy is a social valve for us. Elections are a social valve for us, but people have to exercise them. Just groups, they are also important. You may not be able to win elections, but your perspective and points of view are important. And that's, of course, true. Politicians must have their finger on the pulse on a constant basis. Even I won't say fringes, but even smaller numbers are important. They're not just minorities that need to be brushed aside because you have the majority. But on the other hand, we do have the system of elections, and the fact that there are elections every now and then everywhere allows a certain amount of space for, if there is dissent, for it to get fructified, and otherwise a listen to the people and their voices.
Sure. I want to ask you, Mr. Puri, how do you see the developments of Nepal affect India's internal and external interests?
Nepal is, Tanishka, very, very, very important for India. Uh, and I'll tell you why. It's important because it defines India's hegemony. You and I, if we say we are Vishwa Gurus, in the end, people ask you, so what about in your neighborhood? And the country by which they will judge you is Nepal, not Bangladesh. I wish it was Sri Lanka, but they're far away from us. They will judge you by Nepal. You have a good entree there. Nobody expects you to have perfect relations with them. The US and Canada don't have perfect, but this hegemony is defined in this way, which is why it's absolutely critical. We have an abiding interest in Nepal. What are the interests? Quite apart from security interests, China, the buffer between India and China, we have hegemonic. And Nepal is India in that sense. What do we say? We say, Aap hamare hain. The Nepalese keep stressing, no, we are Nepali. True. They have to play identity politics. And this identity politics with India is the bottom line of the way the Nepalese react on everything. In fact, in the current context, you will see that there will be some kind of blowbacks on Indians, those who look like Indians, etc., because there would be people who try to say there's anger now. This anger has done what it could on the political front, but to dissipate it further, we need to move somewhere here and there. And the easiest one in Nepal is take on Indians, Indian establishments, and so on and so forth. That certainly happened, but important for us is to continue to have strong relations with the people's level at Nepal, very strong relations with the trade and business, this and with the economics and with the politics of Nepal. Believe me, no matter who comes to power, the person sooner rather than later find out that, look, India is that big, huge country with which we have familial relations, civilizational links, and the links of economy are tremendous. That doesn't mean that they won't look elsewhere. The menu of options today not only has China but has the West there. But is it easy for that to happen? Geography has a certain favor as far as we are concerned.
And over the next few years, how do you see the situation unfolding in Nepal? And do you think it will be able to rebuild itself and have a stable government?
So, Tanishka, the 150-year-old monarchy was squeezed out. And unlike in most other countries in the world where the kings fled and went somewhere else, the former Raja lives in Nepal. He's very much there in Kathmandu. So it's a very different kind of society which accepts a lot of these particular things. Rebuilding, I don't think any rebuilding has taken place. The fact that will they be able to get out of their economic morass and do many things, it's a very tough call. It's a landlocked country. It's not very easy. The opportunities are limited. And because they have this identity business vis-a-vis India, which is really the country which is easiest for them to do business in. They feel very diffident and they would like to always have some kind of barriers and hurdles in opening up things, etc. Northward is easier to look at, but no matter what we do in terms of technology and trade which is available, it isn't such a simple matter. The mere costs of doing business with Nepal are much more. And you can keep talking about the West, but there are costs to all this. So really, it's for the Nepalese to think about it themselves. They can, of course, keep on waddling along the way they are doing, which is not bad. As a society, they are doing fine. Are they doing tremendously well as an economy? No. Therefore, are there problems in terms of unemployment? Yes. Let me say something else to you. With the migration levels in Nepal being at what they are, it would surprise you that you can't find labor in Nepal. There are no Nepalis left. The few that are there are the ones that you see in the street. Otherwise, the numbers are very few because of migration, etc. So there are a number of issues. This issue of migration is a very serious issue. Nepal, without productive population, young people in that age available, from the protests, you will say, oh, no, 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 there are so many. But come on, Nepal is a country of 30 million people. So several thousand doesn't make up that kind of a large number. So there are many issues, macroeconomic, geopolitical, all of which require to be handled and handled urgently. It needs sagacity at the political level. And of course, they need to build, in my personal opinion, very relationship with India in which there is benefits to them, and to some extent lowering the barriers which are very easy and which have been the kind of focus in Nepal over 200 years, that this identity, it's all right, we're in the new world. Gen Z and the new people, their way of thinking perhaps is somewhat different, and at least I hope it's different.
Thank you so much, Mr. Puri.
All the best, and wish you and the Quint all the best. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.